attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Lisa. I'm one of the consultants at Nolan, and I'm going to be carrying out the webinar this afternoon on the General Ledger integration product from Nolan Business Solutions. If anyone has any questions as we start to go through the webinar, then you can use the chat that is on the GoToAssist or GoToWebinar. That's one of the options that you've got towards the bottom, so you can always ask any questions within that box. If, however, you'd rather wait until the end, then I'll provide you with a name and an email address of one of my colleagues, Lucy, who will be able to assist you and follow up on any questions that you have after the webinar. So expecting the webinar to take sort of up to half an hour, maybe a bit less, but we'll start going through, and if anyone wants to join, obviously this session has been recorded, so if they go partway through, then they'll always be able to access this afterwards and review it at that point. Okay, so first of all, just to give you a bit of background on the General Ledger integration tool. It is a product that is being created by Nolan Business Solutions. It's been around in a few of the older versions of GP, and is obviously still current in GP 2015 as well. So if you are on some of the older versions, if you're on 2010 or 13, you can also still use the General Ledger integration tool with those versions. And what it will do is it will take your file, a source file, and which you could have either, may even be manually populated, but typically comes from another product, so one of your other third-party products, and that file is then saved down as an Excel or a CSV file, and that data is then basically imported into Dynamics GP. You can, if you want to, you can translate that source data. So you might have terminology that is not going to be accepted necessarily by GP and just needs to be translated from what you have in your source file to a value that is acceptable within GP. So you can set up what those translations need to be, and those can be assigned within the import file and then be generated into Dynamics GP. So obviously having the source file and a method of importing directly into Dynamics will save you time. You don't have to then sit there and obviously manually enter it in. And also because you're taking the data directly from a source file and straight into Dynamics, you're not having to key it in manually, therefore it can reduce the chance of errors that you may well get when the data is imported. Okay, so the way the data can work is it will take, and you don't necessarily need to use it, but it can take a simple code translation, just use a simple table to be able to say what your value is and what you need it to be in order to be accepted within GP. And also the thing of the data is quite straightforward. It's all within GP, so you don't have to be using an external product. Such as an integration manager. You can use it within GP, and it's an intuitive tool for users to be able to set up and to obviously modify as well. So just to show you, we will obviously go into Dynamics GP, and I will show you this in its full extent, but just to give you an example of how that mapping works, you can see there that there's the destination, so where you want the data to be, and the data source. In this case, it says equals 5, and then the example value that it's found within your source file. So here I've got a couple of lines that just show what's on my source file, and 5 in this example is basically the 5th character on the 5th column on your source file. So in this case, column E, and column C is the 3rd one, and that becomes the reference. So you, based on what you have in a source file, you choose what that field is within GP, and you say what column in terms of numbers that is from the data source, and then just to confirm it, it's able to give you that example value at the end, just so you know what you've mapped and that the mapping is correct on there before you start to import the data. Okay, so what we'll do now is we'll go into Dynamics and take a look at the product itself. Okay, so what will happen during an import is the mappings are all in place, and the data will go and be created and be validated, first of all, and then will be created as a journal in Dynamics. And that journal will be in a batch and is saved until you've reviewed it or you've posted it. Okay, then obviously processes in the same way as any other normal journal within the system. So what I'll do to start with is I'll just show you what's involved in processing and importing a file in, and then we can take a look at sort of what's going on behind that, so you can get an idea on the amount of setup that's required on here. Okay, so first of all we go for the import processing, and we choose what we call a definition ID, which is basically how you've mapped the data and you've linked it to a specific source file, and from here, once that source file has been saved down to your location, then you're able to begin the import. So what happens is the import starts, it validates all of the data that you have within the source file. So it's checking to make sure that your accounts are valid, there's no strange characters with dates, and that it can understand that you've marked them as standard transactions or possibly reversing transactions, and then it goes through and creates a batch within Dynamics with all of those transactions in there for us. Okay, so once it's completed, it just closes down. There's no errors with this particular file, so we know that that's all gone through into the system okay. So I can then take a look at the batches. And my batch is called Journal Import, and that basically produced a batch of journals for me. So they've got the value as normal and the amount of journals that that's created. And then in the normal way, I can go and have a look at those transactions. Okay, so each of the transactions that have come through have their own source document, so they're identifiable as XPL, which is a class of imported transactions, and then each of the journals are processed in. Okay, so they're just the normal types of journals, and you can bring in your reference, the date, everything has to be saved into a batch, and you can also bring through the distribution reference, so that all of those fields are populated. And within the batch, it's also, as I sort of mentioned, reversing transactions are also an option for you to be able to use. So it caters for that side as well. So from the end user's point of view, once the definition has been created, i.e. the mapping, then it's a case of having that file ready to be imported. Now what happens during the import process is the original source file will be named. It needs to be the same name each time, just to save you really having to go in and just select a different source. And And then once that's been imported, it is then given a different reference. So it changes from its original name, mine was just called GL import, and then it is changed to GL import with X amount of numbers after it. So you can't re-import the same file more than once, but you do have a record of the previous files that have been imported for as long as you want to keep a record of those. So what we'll do is take a look at the files. So first of all, go into the interface definition, and within here I've given my definition a name. As I say, you can have multiple definitions. You may have different source files, different data in them, and the mapping needs to be slightly different, so you can have as many of those as you need. And a description. Obviously, same, anything that's bold needs to be populated. The file types are CSV or Excel, and it will cater for some of the older versions of Excel as well. Okay. This case, just to show you, this one is a CSV file, and the import file, you select where you want to pull the data from, and mine was called GL import, and then in the screen below you're able to say, well, where you want it to be saved. It can be saved to a totally different file, file location, or you could name it the same, and as I've done here, you have a certain number of hashes after it, and those hashes represent the sequence numbers. So I've done 13 imports of the file, and so it's 014 is going to be the next number. So that would go all the way up to 999, so you just allow for as many hashes as you need, numbers, depending on how frequently you're going to be running them. And what you can then do is decide what you want to have happen if it does find any errors, and you can reject the file if the journal doesn't balance. You can just integrate it without checking, so it will just put everything through, and you would then have to probably run an edit list in your batch just to make sure you didn't have any unbalanced journals, things like that. Or you can correct balances and integrate, which would then use a control account to put the remaining balance to. Or you can reject the file if the total amount imbalances. So rather than checking individual journals, it would just check whether or not the entire journal does or doesn't balance. And then we just reject it from running at all until you've corrected the data, and then it would be able to rerun it again. Okay, so there's a lot of validation that takes place before it actually gets imported into Dynamics, and then your control account would be listed on here. So I've just got a suspense account because I know that my debits and credits all balance up, but it may be that you want to use the control account and actually have it being posted to that offset account, depending on the type of journal that you're processing. And then below are the mappings that we have. So the account number equals 5, and what I'll do is if I just bring a file back from being imported, because the one that I imported was had changed from my GL import, no longer existed. If I just reselect that one now, then what it does is it picks up and says, okay, yeah, the account number in column 5, that's the data that you're going to get returned. Same with the reference, which is a reference on here, reversing date, so that they can all go in the same file. The file can cater for as many different journals as you want to have in there. It's not one file per journal, it's one file per many journals, okay? And so we've got standard transactions in here, we've got reversing transactions that are in here as well, and we've got just sort of doing a transaction date and types and batches. So all of the typical and currencies, because it could be a multi-currency journal as well. So we basically say that, you know, the description, for example, is going to be in column 4, so it's in column D basically, on the Excel spreadsheet. So then we simply choose out of the file what are the logical places to break all of that data up into to make a separate journal. And in this case, I've chosen reference and transaction date. So everywhere where it finds a unique break between the date and the reference, a unique journal is then created. So that's how, just by simply ticking the box, it knows when to start a new journal. We choose the date format, and that pulls through, depending on how you have that format set up within your source file. Just a standard date, month, and year there, but if you have it set up slightly differently, then that format can be modified to accommodate it. The other thing that you may have, as I mentioned earlier, was a translation that needs to take place. So you can create a translation table which identifies what the source is and what it needs to be, and that's what I have in this scenario here. So I have a transaction type, and it's CONV is the sort of the prefix to identify that it needs to go and find a table, and I've named that table translate. So we'll take a look at that code table. If I pull that up onto the screen, and that will make a little bit more sense. So the code definition is called translate, and in my source file, it is a reversing transaction is identified as REV, and just a normal standard journal is identified as STD in the source file, but in Dynamics GP, it's identified as 1 and 0. So the source file can then basically accommodate that. So anywhere where it finds REV, it will translate it to a 1 so that it can be understood by GP, basically. Okay, so it's quite a sort of a straightforward match there between what you're seeing in your source file and what field you want, and where it needs to go into GP. There are a number of other fields that we can add in here, because the GL integration also accommodates the MBA or analytical accounting. And if you're using the Nolan intercompany, it will also work in line with the Nolan intercompany product as well. So you can also put those transactions through the GL integration tool. Okay, so what I'll do is show you what would happen if it found an invalid file on the within the file. So what I'll do is just use a different file that we've got on there. So I'm now looking at a slightly different data, and I shall save that. And just go and do my import. Okay, so basically, if it doesn't like the data in the file, it goes through and check it, tell you that there's a problem, and then it will generate a report for you so that you're able to see what it doesn't like about it. So it just confirms which file you're picking up, and then it was aborted because it found errors. So firstly, in the first row, my account code doesn't exist. And then in the 7th row, it's then finding that there's an imbalance of data as well. So it not only tells me that there's been a problem, it tells me what the problem is and whereabouts in the file that that problem has occurred. So I can then go and correct it, and obviously make the and then do the import again. So that file will remain as it is in the system. It won't rename. It will just be there for you to be able to pick it back up and correct it, and then try and import it again. Okay, so in addition to the import, there's also some additional reporting that's available. So we've got a interface audit, which would allow you to see what's basically been processed. So it'll be a record of everything that's gone through the GL integration tool. So I can see from here any that have got errors or have had errors upon import, and obviously then there's some that have processed okay. We've got the date that they were processed and the time, and the amount of lines that it was able to import and the value that was imported as well. So you can see that, the 803,000, there was, how many lines were imported, 137, and there were 7 journals that went through for that. So it just gives you a record, and so you can check and see who ran what and whether or not it actually went through the system okay. And that will just validate whether or not, if you didn't see it or that batch isn't processed, then at least you know whether or not it had actually been imported or not. So this report just tends to grow, but there is the option as well to be able to clear it down. So you can sort of choose to basically say, just show me, just clear down, some batch numbers, or clear down everything up to a certain point in time, so that you keep a more current list of the journals that are being imported, and then you can clear it down and it will just update that report so that it doesn't continue to show all of that information in there if it's no longer relevant. Okay, so if you were using the sort of MDA or analytical accounting, in the different example that we have on there, it would just be a case of adding, using a spyglass, where you have a list of all of the available fields for entering a journal. You can then select the appropriate fields in the description, again map them in, and then you would have all of those items on there. So you can just add those elements, and it's just in the usual way, link them to the source file, and it would show you the data on here just to validate it, and then you're able to go ahead and import it. Same validation occurs whether or not you want to reject the file if the whole thing doesn't balance, or just certain journals on there as well. Okay, so the format of your file may vary slightly. Just one of the things, just with regards to the amount, if you have debits and credits, you can have separate columns for debits and credits, or you just have one column for the transaction amount, and then anything that's a negative it treats as a credit, and anything that's a positive goes through as a debit onto the system. So there's a bit of flexibility as well with that side of things. Okay, but hopefully that seems like quite a logical way of creating an import, and that can be managed and maintained by users within GP rather than having to access an additional product. Okay, so that brings me sort of through the GL integration tool, and hopefully that's sort of given you an idea on the process and how the product works, and whether or not that would be something that's obviously going to be useful to you. As I say, it can be used within some of the older products as well within GP. It's been around for a while, and is still available obviously in the most current release of GP 2015. As I say, if anyone does have any questions, then I'll just take a look and see if there's been any questions that have been raised as I've been going through. There aren't at the moment, but if anyone does have any, then please do contact Lucy, and she'll be able to get back to you with any questions that you've got on there. So that's Lucy's email address, and if you have any questions, then obviously please do let us know. Otherwise, that is an overview of the Nolan Business Solutions GL integration. Thank you for your time.